Talking of a barrister who had a bad utterance, someone, footnote tells us this is probably Boswell, said to rouse Johnson, wickedly said, in fact, that he was unfortunate in not having been taught oratory by Sheridan. Johnson said, "Nay, sir, if he had been taught by Sheridan, he would have cleared the room." Garrick said, "Sheridan has too much vanity to be a good man." We shall now see Johnson's mode of defending a man, taking him into his own hands and discriminating. Johnson said, "No, sir, there is to be sure in Sheridan something to reprehend and everything to laugh at. But, sir, he's not a bad man. No, sir, were mankind to be divided into good and bad, he would stand considerably within the ranks of good. And, sir, it must be allowed that Sheridan excels in plain declamation, though he can exhibit no character. I should, perhaps, have suppressed this disquisition concerning a person of whose merit and worth I think with respect, had he not attacked Johnson so outrageously in his Life of Swift, and at the same time treated us, his admirers, as a set of pygmies. He who has provoked the lash of wit cannot complain that he smarts from it." Mrs. Montague, a lady distinguished for having written an essay on Shakespeare, being mentioned, Reynolds said, "I think that essay does her honor." Johnson, of course, said, "Yes, sir, it does her honor, but it would do nobody else honor. I have, indeed, not read it at all, but when I take up the end of a web and find it packthread, I do not expect, by looking further, to find embroidery." Well, that's a good little zinger, huh? "Sir, I will venture to say there is not one sentence of true criticism in her work." Garrick said, "But, sir, surely it shows how much Voltaire has mistaken Shakespeare, which nobody else has done." Johnson said, "Sir, nobody else has thought it worth while. And what merit is there in that? You may as well praise a schoolmaster for whipping a boy who has construed ill. No, sir, there is no real criticism in it. None showing the beauty of thought as formed on the workings of the human heart." I love how what a pompous windbag he is. He's great, isn't he? Such a little cynic. The admirers of the essay, of whom I acknowledge myself to be one, considering it as a piece of the secondary or comparative species of criticism, and not of that profound species which alone Dr. Johnson would allow to be real criticism. It is, besides, clearly and elegantly expressed, and has done effectually what is professed to do, namely, vindicated Shakespeare from the misrepresentations of Voltaire. And considering how many young people were misled by his witty, though false observations, Mrs. Montague's essay was of service to Shakespeare with a certain class of readers, and is therefore entitled to praise. Johnson, I am sure, it allowed the merit which I have stated, saying, with reference to Voltaire, "It is conclusive ad hominem," that is, to the man. Anyway, the admirers of this essay, such as myself, may be offended at the slighting manners in which Johnson spoke of it. But let it be remembered that he gave his honest opinion unbiased by any prejudice or any proud jealousy of a woman intruding herself into the chair of criticism. For Sir Joshua Reynolds has told me that when the essay first came out, and it was not known who had written it, Johnson wondered how Sir Joshua could like it. At this time, Sir Joshua himself had received no information concerning the author, except being assured by one of our most eminent literati, perhaps Malone, that it was clear its author did not know the Greek tragedies in the original. One day at Sir Joshua's table, when it was related that Mrs. Montague, in an excess of compliment to the author, that is, Jepson, of Mrs. Thrale and Stevens, had exclaimed, I tremble for Shakespeare. Johnson said, when Shakespeare has got for his rival and Miss Montague for his defender, he is in poor state indeed. Anyway, let's move on. Johnson proceeded. The Scotchman, Lord Keynes, has taken the right method in his elements of criticism. I do not mean that he has taught us anything, but he has told us old things in a new way. Murphy said, he seems to have read a great deal of French criticism and wants to make it his own, as if he had been for years anatomizing, yes, the heart of man and peeping into every cranny of it. Goldsmith said, it is easier to write that book than to read it. Johnson said, we have an example of true criticism in Burke's Essays on the Sublime and Beautiful. And if I recollect, there is also Du Bois and Bohers, who shows all beauty to depend on truth. There's no great merit in telling how many plays have ghosts in them, and how this ghost is better than that. You must show how terror is impressed on the human heart. In the description of night in Macbeth, the beetle and the bat detract from the general idea of darkness, incipitated gloom. Incipitated? Is that a word? That's what he used. INSPISSATED. Incipitated, I guess. Don't know that one, I'm afraid. Politics being mentioned, Johnson said, this petitioning is a new mode of distressing government, and a mighty easy one. I will undertake to get petitions either against quarter guineas or half guineas, with the help of a little hot wine. There must be no yielding to encourage this. The object is not important enough. We are not to blow up half a dozen palaces because one cottage is burning. I wonder if that's a reference to Guy Fawkes there. The conversation then took another turn. Johnson said, it is amazing what ignorance of certain points one sometimes finds in men of eminence. A wit, a later footnote tells us, perhaps he's talking about the Reverend B. Loveling, about town, who wrote Latin bawdy verses, asked me how it happens that England and Scotland, which were once two kingdoms, were now one. And Sir Fletcher Norton did not seem to know that there were such publications as the Reviews. The Ballad of Hardicanute has no great merit, if it be really ancient. People talk of nature, but mere obvious nature may be exhibited with very little power of mind. And that's all we get from that little snide fest. On Thursday, October 19th of 1769, I passed this evening with him at his house. He advised me to complete a dictionary of words peculiar to Scotland, of which I showed him a specimen. Sir, said he, Ray has made a collection of North Country words. By collecting those of your country, you will be a useful thing towards the history of the language. He bade me also go on with collections which I was making upon the antiquities of Scotland. Make a large book, a folio, he said. I said, but of what use will it be, sir? Johnson said, never mind the use. Do it. So he's going to start a dictionary of haggis and what other Scottish words do we... that's all I got, haggis. All right. Next page. I complained that he had not mentioned Garrick in his preface to Shakespeare, and asked him if he did not admire him. Now, let's all remember that Johnson doesn't like players for whatever reason. I think because his that tragedy he wrote when he was like in his 20s was a real flop. And I think Garrick put it on, if I'm not mistaken, and kind of supported him, but maybe Johnson blames Garrick for its failure. Anyway, this is what Johnson says. Yes, as a poor player, who frets and struts his hour upon the stage as a shadow. Ooh, dis. Boswell said, but has he not brought Shakespeare into notice? Johnson said, Sir, to allow that would be to lampoon the age. Many of Shakespeare's plays are the worst for being acted. Macbeth, for instance. Boswell said, what, sir, is nothing gained by decoration and action? Indeed, I do wish that you had mentioned Garrick. He answered, my dear sir, had I mentioned him, I must have mentioned many more. Mrs. Pritchard, Mrs. Cibber, nay, and Mr. Cibber too. He too altered Shakespeare. I said, you have read his apology, sir. Johnson said, yes, it is very entertaining, but as for Cibber himself, taking from his conversation all that he ought not to have said, he was a poor creature. I remember when he brought me one of his odes to have my opinion of it. I could not bear such nonsense, and would not let him read it to the end. So little respect had I for that great man. Yes, I remember Richardson wondering that I could treat him with familiarity. I mentioned to him that I had seen the execution of several convicts at Tyburn 2 days before, and that none of them seemed to be under any concern. Johnson said, most of them, sir, have never thought at all. I said, but is not the fear of death natural to man? Johnson said, so much so, sir, that the whole of life is but keeping away the thought of it. He then, in a low and earnest tone, talked of his meditating upon the awful hour of his own dissolution, and in what manner he should conduct himself upon that occasion. I know not, said he, whether I should wish to have a friend by me, or have it all between God and myself. Talking of our feeling for the distresses of others, Johnson said, why, sir, there is much noise made about it, but it is greatly exaggerated. No, sir, we have a certain degree of feeling to prompt us to do good. More than that, Providence does not intend. It would be misery to do no purpose. I said, but suppose now, sir, that one of your intimate friends were apprehended for an offence from which he might be hanged. Johnson said, I should do what I could to bail him and give him any other assistance, but if he were only fairly hanged, I should not suffer. I said, would you eat your dinner that day, sir? He said, yes, sir, and eat it as if he were eating it with me. Why, there's Baretti, who is to be tried for his life tomorrow. Friends have risen up for him on every side. Yet if he should be hanged, none of them will eat a slice of plum pudding the less. Sir, that sympathetic feeling goes a very little way in depressing the mind. I told him that I had dined lately at Foote's, who showed me a letter which he had received from Tom Davies, telling him that he had not been able to sleep from the concern which he felt on account of the sad affair of Baretti, begging of him to try if he could suggest anything that might be of service, and at the same time recommending to him an industrious young man who kept a pickle shop. Johnson said, Aye, sir, here you have a specimen of human sympathy, a friend hanged, and a cucumber pickled. We know not whether Baretti or the pickle man has kept Davies from sleep, nor does he know himself. And as to his not sleeping, sir, Tom Davies is a very great man. Tom has been upon the stage and knows how to do those things. I have not been upon the stage and cannot do those things. What's he talking about? Cannot do pickling, or what? I said, I have often blamed myself for not feeling for others as sensibly as many say they do. Johnson said, Sir, don't be duped by them any more. You will find those very feeling people are not very ready to do you good. They pay you by feeling. I said, Foot has a great deal of humor. Johnson said, yes, sir. I said, he has a singular talent of exhibiting character. Johnson said, sir, it is not a talent, it is a vice. It is what others abstain from. It is not comedy which exhibits the character of his species, as that of a miser gathered from many misers. It is farce which exhibits individuals. I said, did not he think of exhibiting you, sir? Johnson said, sir, fear restrained him. He knew I would have broken his bones. I would have saved him the trouble of cutting off a leg. I would not have left him a leg to cut off. I said, pray, sir, is not Foot an infidel? He said, I do not know, sir, that the fellow is an infidel. But if he is an infidel, he is an infidel as a dog is an infidel. That is to say, he has never thought upon the subject. I said, I suppose, sir, he has thought superficially and seized the first notions which occurred to his mind. He said, why, then, sir, still he is like a dog that snatches the piece next to him. Did you never observe that dogs have not the power of comparing? A dog will take a small bit of meat as ready as a large, when both are before him. Footnote here about this subject. When Mr. Foot was at Edinburgh, he thought fit to entertain a numerous Scotch company with a great deal of coarse jocularity at the expense of Dr. Johnson, imagining it would be acceptable. I felt that it is not civil of me, but sat very patiently till he had exhausted his merriment on that subject, and then observed that surely Johnson must be allowed to have some sterling wit, and that I had heard him say a very good thing of Mr. Foot himself. Ah, my old friend Sam, cried Foot. No man says better things, do let us have it. Upon which I told the above story, which produced a very loud laugh from the company. But I never saw Foot so disconcerted. He looked grave and angry, and entered into a serious refutation of the justice of the remark. What, sir, said he, talk this of a man of liberal education, a man who for years was at the University of Oxford, a man who has added 60 new characters to the English drama of his country. So I guess he didn't like being called an infidel. Anyway, moving on. Buchanan, Johnson observed, has fewer centos than any modern Latin poet. He not only had a great knowledge of the Latin language, but was a great poetical genius. Both the Scaliger's praise him. He again talked of the passage in Congreve with high commendation, and said, Shakespeare never had 6 lines together without a fault. Perhaps you might find 7, but this does not refute my general assertion. If I come to an orchard and say there is no fruit here, and then comes a poring man who finds 2 apples and 3 pears and tells me, Sir, you are mistaken, I have found both apples and pears, I should laugh at him. What would that be to the purpose? I said, What do you think of Dr. Young's night thoughts, sir? Johnson said, Why, sir, there are very fine things in them. I said, Is there not less religion in the nation now, sir, than there was formerly? Johnson said, I don't know, sir, that there is. I said, For instance, there used to be a chaplain in every great family, which we do not find now. Johnson said, Neither do you find many of the state servants, which great families used formerly to have. There's a change of modes in the whole department of life. And that's where we'll stop, because the next one is the next day. Till next time, bye from Boswell.